are, as you know, on a series called Big Generosity. So we're going to continue on that line today. Last week, as you know, was Mother's Day, and if you missed last week's message, man, I encourage you, go back and get Pastor Casey Treat's message. I think it was one of the finest messages that we've ever had here at Coastal Church. It's such a rich topic, how to be your best when you feel your worst. So if you missed last week, go back, get that on the podcast, or you can watch it online, because it really was a message in season and so tied into our series on being generous. Because there are days when you don't feel like being generous, and you still have to be your best, but you don't feel like it. Generous with your time, your resources, your talents. So I encourage you to go back, get Pastor Casey Treat's message. Then in our life groups, we've been studying also about generosity through a series called The Blessed Life with Pastor Robert Morris. They've been really rich. And if you were at life group last week, you know it was really a great lesson. He called it the test. And I really enjoyed it. And I could relate. Maybe some of you could relate to it as well. Because he talked about going to school and somebody would say, hey, there's a test. And he would say, what test? And then he went on to explain how every time we're paid or as we receive income and resources, there is a test that God has for us. Are we going to honor God with the first of what He's given to us? That's today's message. We're going to talk about being generous and honoring God first with all that He's given to us. God can never be second. It's impossible for Him to be second. He's God. He's first. And so how do we honor God with the first? Some things that he shared in his message that I really liked. One was he referred back to the book of Malachi, and he talked about God saying, you have gone away from my ordinances. And that word, he explained, really comes from the same word that we get ordinary. It means common or natural or it just means ordinary ordinances. These are natural things that should be taking place in our life. And you know that giving should be just something that we naturally do. Honoring God is something we should naturally do with our finances. So if you've missed those in a life group, I encourage you to get signed up, be part of a life group. At all our campuses, we always have a night set aside. So if you're not quite sure where to go, you can come out to one of those evenings. And our campus pastor will be glad to help you find that night or another group that you could go. Stay with us as we learn how to live a blessed life by being big, generous givers. So let's get into our notes today. You had a handout when you came. You can also get it on the app. That'll help you as well. And we'll get into our message for today. Our message is called Generosity Starts with Honoring God. Most of us, whether we recognize it or not, are leaving a digital footprint. If you walk outside and you have your Wi-Fi on and you look for free Wi-Fi like I do, and I didn't realize just how much information I'm actually leaving with other businesses. There's a company in Toronto called Toronto Solutions. Toronto Turnstile Solutions. And they track the Wi-Fi data as you log in and log off. This article about it said this: the next time you walk into a restaurant, you could be added to a private database that records not just what time you're craving a burger, but also what you did before and after lunch. Did you go to a vegetarian restaurant more than this spot? Do you visit other shops in the area? They said the radio technology in your smartphone allows you to connect to Wi-Fi is tattling on you. And so we're leaving with our phones, and also as we use our credit cards or interact, we leave this massive digital footprint, whether we realize it or not. Well, do you know we also leave a spiritual footprint? The way we give, the way we serve leaves a spiritual footprint. And God's more interested in our spiritual footprint than He is in the digital footprint. God cares about what flows from our heart and how we give and where we give. So today we're going to take a look at how can we honor God with the first. I'm going to put up a Proverbs chapter 3, verse 1 to 10. Here, Solomon is teaching his son the importance, really, of honoring God first. We're going to take these few verses here, just go verse by verse and walk through them today. It says, my child, he's talking to his son here, my child, remember my teachings and instructions and obey them completely. Now, on your notes, I want you to just circle or highlight this word completely. Not just part of them, but do it completely. There are such great benefits, such great rewards. What we're really looking for in life, we receive when we just follow God completely, full surrender. I'm following you completely. At all our campuses today, come on, Pitt Meadow, Strathcona, Commercial, here downtown, let's say this word out loud, completely. Would you say it with me? Say, completely. That's it. We're following Him completely. Now, as we go through this proverb, it's in your notes, we'll put it on the screen. Watch what happens. What are the benefits of just following God completely? And I think the writer here, he's really preparing us for the importance of honoring God. He's kind of telling you, here are the benefits before he gets into honoring God with your finances. So let's read on. Verse number 2, honor Him completely. Then they will help you live a long and prosperous life. Man, right there is two big benefits. Circle the word long and prosperous life. Everybody wants to live a long life. There's all kinds of food supplements, exercise programs. People want to live longer, and we want to live a prosperous life. Right there, live a long, prosperous life. How? Following Him completely. Verse 3. Let love and loyalty always show like a necklace, and write them in your mind. Another translation says, bind mercy and truth. Bind them around your neck. Keep them with you all the time. These are the instructions on how to follow completely. Verse 4, God and people will like you and consider you a success. Really, that's what everybody wants. They want God to like them. We want people to like us. And really, we'd like people to think we are a success. That's why we dress a certain way, drive a certain car, do certain things. We think, I want people to think I am a success. When we post something on Instagram or whatever, we want people to think we're successful and like us. This is a promise. When we follow God completely, surrender to Him, here's the reward. God and people will like you and consider you a success. We just turn to the person beside you and say, I really like you. Just turn to them and give them some encouragement today before we read on. You did a great job of that. Let's go to verse number 5. With all your heart, you must trust the Lord and not your own judgment. Now again, here Solomon's preparing his son for some instructions. Because when we get to a few verses down in verse 9 and 10, when it starts to talk about honoring God with your wealth, about that point we say, oh, you know what, I'm not sure. I think I'll go with my own judgment on that. Instead of what God says, I think I'll take my judgment on that. So he's preparing us for verse 9 and 10. Let's go on. Verse 6. Always let Him lead you, and He will clear the road for you to follow. So again, it's this surrender. God, I trust you. I'm going to allow you to lead me. Verse 7. Don't ever think that you are wise enough, but respect the Lord and stay away from evil. Don't lean to your own understanding. Don't think you're smarter than God. Just trust Him in this. Surrender to Him. Verse number 8. This will make you healthy and you will feel strong. Just highlight that in your notes, healthy and strong. So far, look at the benefits we've had when we completely obey and follow God. Live long, prosperous, people like us, God likes us, we find favor with others, and also this verse saying we're healthy and strong. So far, these benefits are amazing, aren't they? So now we'll go to verse number 9. All this was to prepare us for honoring God this way. Honor the Lord by giving Him your money. And the first part, not the last part, the first part of all your crops. See, a generous heart honors God with the first. The first of our day, the first of our talent, and the first of our finances. We honor God first. We trust Him completely. Do you see now why the writer here said a couple times, trust God with all your heart. Don't lean to your own understanding. Because when it comes to finances, oh, you know what? I'll trust God with other stuff, but I think my finances, I want to do that my way. And God says, I want you to have a healthy life. I want you to have a strong life. And I want you to find favor with others. live long and prosperous. But that will be, in order to do that, you have to honor me first with your finances, with your wealth, your money, and the first part of all your crops. And then finally, verse 10, then you'll have more grain and more grapes than you'll ever need. In other words, as we put God first, there's this flow of blessing that comes into our life as we honor Him. So let's go to our notes here today and look at a couple points. When we honor God with our money, it does four powerful things, four simple things we want to review today. Number one, it reflects, if you're taking notes, the word is reflects, it reflects our understanding that God is a source of all we have. A few years ago, I read this story about a guy who took his son out for a burger and fries. And what happened when he took him out for a burger and fries? If you're a parent, I bet you've had the same thing happen to you. So let me read to you what happened to him. He says, one afternoon I took my 3-year-old son, Jordy, to McDonald's for a snack. I got Jordy his favorite, fries and ketchup. We sat down together. As Jordy was eating his fries, I did what every father's right was. I reached over and took a couple of his fries. His response was, hey, those are my fries. You can't have them. As a father, I was indignant, maybe even a little hurt. Clearly, my son had a few things to learn about his father, his fries, and the relationship to his fries and to his father. First, he needed to realize that I am the source of the fries. It was my money that bought the fries, and it was because of me that he had any at all. Also, he didn't understand that I, as his father, have the power and the authority to take away all his fries I want to. Something else Jordy doesn't understand is that if I have the power and the resources, which I do, I could walk over the counter with a $50 bill and say to the person at the counter, bury him in French fries. Jordy needs to realize that I don't really need his French fries. I don't need his French fries because I can buy them if I want. Do you know what would be even better than me taking a couple of Jordy's French fries? It would be if he said, here you go, Daddy. Here's some of my fries. You gave them to me. There's a very simple yet accurate picture, he writes, of our relationship with God. We need to realize that those same things about God and our money. God is a source of all we have. He is not in need of our money, and yet it pleases and honors Him when we're faithful in giving to Him. So our first point is it reflects our understanding that God is the source of all we have. There's a good verse in Deuteronomy 8, verses 17 and 18. This is when they came out of Egypt into the promised land, and God is giving them a warning. He says to them, when you become successful, don't say, I'm rich, I've earned it all myself. Instead, remember that the Lord your God gives you strength to make a living. Remember that. He gave you strength. He gave you the air you breathe, the mind you have, the contacts you have. He's given that to you. That's how He keeps the promise He made to your ancestors. God made a covenant that I'll bless you, I'll be with you. Instead of us thinking, it was my great skill, me investing at the right time, did the right thing, that's why I have this wealth. He says, don't you forget. Don't fall into the trap and think it was you that did that. Remember, this is all a gift from me. I'm asking you to manage it, to steward it. So that's number one. Secondly, how can we honor God with generosity? What's the impact of it? We need to understand it reveals our love for God and our trust in His ways. If you filling in the blanks, put the word it reveals there. A number of years ago, we had a speaker come to Business by the Book by the name of Dave Crisco. That's about 2006, 2007, a few years ago now. And at that time, Dave was just really ramping up a program on the website called Club Penguin. He'd worked with some others on his staff to get this up and running. Well, it absolutely took off. And they literally had millions of people on the website. They had 700,000 preteens that were paying to be on the website. So it was massive. It really had taken off. And then he shared the story with us how Disney approached their company to buy it. And it was no small purchase. They started off by paying them $350 million. This is a guy out of Kelowna with his team. And then another $350 million would come later if they performed well. I read the story in the Globe and Mail a number of years ago, but there was something that caught my eye when I read through this. Club Penguin, which is a virtual world where millions of preteens meet, chat, and play games via 2D Penguin proxies. They went on to share there how when they went to do this, they closed the deal. But the deal was conditional on Disney paying a tithe off the revenue from Club Penguin. And this article in the Globe and Mail, it said that Disney was so surprised. And for Dave and the rest of the guys, they said, this is a deal breaker. If you won't tithe off the profits from Club Penguin, we're not going to do the deal. And so as a result, Disney said, okay, we'll stick with that, and we will tithe off this company. What a story that was, that they would stick to their guns. And I think that's one of the reasons why it had taken off and had really prospered, because they had honored God from the very get-go with that business. In your notes, there's some other quotes that I put there of other great business people. So John Templeton, chairman of Templeton Fund, said, I've observed 100,000 families over my years of investment counseling. I always saw greater prosperity and happiness among those families who tithe than among those who didn't. That came from somebody that knew a little bit about investing. Another fellow you would recognize, John D. Rockefeller Sr., American industrialist, a great philanthropist, had this to say: I never would have been able to tithe the first $1 million I ever made if I had not tithed my first salary, which was $1.50 a week. You have to start small, but he honored God with the first when he was just receiving a little bit. Another one, James L. Kraft. We know him from the Kraft Cheese Company, and he said this: the only investment I ever made, which has paid consistently increasing dividends, is the money that I've given to the Lord. In the lesson that we had this past week with Robert Morris, he went to the book of Malachi. And if you're Italian, you can say the word Malachi if you like, but anyhow, Malachi, I think, is the right way to say it. Malachi chapter 3, verses 8 to 9, where it says, will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. I want to stop there just for a bit, where it says here, will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, in what way have we robbed you? God said, in tithes and offerings. When you think about it, how could we possibly rob from God? How do you steal something from God? Well, we have to remember that God is all about relationships. For God so loved the world that he gave his Son. Today is Pentecost Sunday. And of all the weekends of the world, on the calendar, this is one of the greatest days of generosity, where Jesus said, I will give you my Spirit. I will pour out my Spirit upon you. Of all the things that I have in my life, I suppose the most precious thing that I have is the Holy Spirit within me. This is Pentecost Sunday, and what a time to just reflect on the generosity of God. He gave us his Spirit. So he's about relationship. And here God says in Malachi, you've robbed me. And you say, well, how have we robbed you? How can I rob God? He says, you've robbed me because you haven't brought your tithes and offerings. It wasn't because God needed the money. It's about relationship. God has set up principles. Way back in Genesis already, he said there will always be seed time and harvest. There will always be this expression of sowing something and reaping. There will be a way that we give when we love others. This is a principle of give and it shall be given to you. From Genesis to Revelation, there's this principle that God has of sowing and reaping, giving, receiving. There's this principle in the Scriptures. And the way we rob God is we've robbed him from the opportunity to bless us. If someone comes to you and says, I don't want you in my life anymore. I'm not going to give to you anymore. I'm closing the door on you. I used to give you time, affection, gifts, and I've closed all that off. And I don't want your gifts coming to me. I really shut that off. You would feel so robbed because you feel like, no, I want to love you. If, I've seen people go through different types of family scenarios where maybe say, I don't want you to be with my children anymore. I've counseled mothers and grandmothers, grandfathers, and because of a family split, the grandparents are cut off from loving these grandchildren, and they feel so robbed. They feel, oh, I want to give to these grandkids. I want to spoil them. I want to bless them. I want to bring some gifts with me when I come over to see them, and you're robbing me of loving them. And that's what God the Father is saying here. You've robbed me of the opportunity to love you, to bless you, because you have not worked within my principles. God can't go against his own principles. He says, you've robbed me as a daddy, as a father. You robbed me of the privilege of blessing you, of loving you, because you've turned away from honoring me with your tithes and your offerings. Well, a man robbed God, yet you've robbed me. But you say, in what way have we robbed you? In tithes and offerings. You're cursed with a curse, for you've robbed me, even this whole nation. And as we learned this past week, Robert Morris was talking about that. The curse really means there's consequences to your actions. There's consequences that have come upon you because you have not honored me with the first. The first commandment, we know this when they came to Jesus and they said, what's the great commandment? He said, well, the first great commandment is to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Love God. Then love your neighbor as yourself. And so if this is the great commandment to love God, of course we'd want to love him and honor him with the first, with what he's given to us. And really, as we bring our tithes, we don't give our tithes, really we're bringing what he's entrusted to us. He said, all of this is in your care, but this portion belongs to me. Really, all of it is his, but he said, set this aside to honor me with that. It's the first 10%. We set it aside for him. And as, again, going back to Robert Morris's teaching that he had on the Life Group video, some people will say, well, that was an Old Testament thing. But we find Jesus referring to it in the New Testament. We find that it was there before the law. We find this principle of honoring God with the first throughout the entire Scriptures. And when you love God, when you know what he's done for you, when you really have experienced his love, his grace, his forgiveness, where he washed you and made you whole, and you have this intimacy with him, it's such a privilege to honor him with the first. It really does, as this point as we've put down here, it really does reveal our love and our trust in him. Because we're saying, God, I trust you. That as I give the first to you, I have more than enough with the rest you've given to me. It's not just a check mark I check off. Okay, now I've done that, so I'm spiritually fit. No, really, it's not just the first, the tithe that I want to honor him with. I honor him with all of it. The other 90%, I still honor him with that as well, the way I steward those resources. And it could be much more than that. Really, that is just a benchmark that we see throughout the Scriptures. The New Testament church, really, when you look at it, they gave far more than that. Even the Old Testament, they had different types of tithes. The whole principle was this heart of generosity that came from them. The third thing is it releases finances for the work of the ministry. Malachi 3 verse 10, it says, bring all the tithes into the storehouse that there may be food in my house. And without the giving into the Lord's work, very difficult for a church building to be open, an Alpha course to be run, children's ministry, all the regular expenses that you have, but it provides a place, a way for us to minister in the city. So one of the purposes of honoring God is that it releases finances into the work of the ministry. In June, coming up on our concert of prayer night, we'll also have a time of celebration. And once a year we go through, and you may be asking today, so well, how are the church finances spent? Where does that picture shown to us? And so our annual report goes online, but we also take a night where we just review it. And you may be interested in, say, hey, I want to learn more. How does it get released to the church? And so you can join us there on that last Thursday of June for that. Number 4, our last point, we've got to wrap this up. Number 4, it removes the blockage from God blessing our lives. The word you want to put in there is the word removes. A number of years ago when we lived in Regina, I had this fellow come up to me. He was quite worried and really concerned. His name was Reg. Reg came up and he said, Pastor Dave, you were talking about the importance of honoring God with our first and trusting Him. And he said, and he came from an unchurched background. It was all really new to him. It might be very new for some of you, and you're wrestling with it. Maybe even as husband and wife, you're wrestling with this whole issue. Well, he was wrestling with it. And he said, Dave, we really live kind of paycheck to paycheck. And he had a pretty good job. They weren't, hard up by any means, but he felt like, just the way we've budgeted our mortgage and car payment and everything, we're just pretty well living paycheck to paycheck. And I don't really know if we can bring a tithe into God's house. I just don't know how we're going to do it. And so we had a little chat there, and he was really wrestling with it. And so I said, well, in this passage in Malachi, God says, test me now in this. It's the only place where God says, you can test me on this. So I said to Reg, why don't you try this? Just start where you're at. Start somewhere. I'm not going to say it's 10% or 2%, but or whatever. You just go back between you and your wife, you pray about, and you just start and see what God will do. And Reg said, okay, I'm going to try this because God so changed my life. I want to trust Him. I'm just kind of taking baby steps here, so how do I do this? So Reg went back, him and his wife, they prayed about it. And I actually forgot about it. I hadn't thought about it for a long time. And then it was near the end of the year, and Reg was just beaming. He came up to me, smiling. He says, Dave, I got to talk to you. I haven't been letting you in on this, but, I talked to you there back at the beginning of the year, and we started with just a small percentage, but we did what we could. We started with that, and we realized that, hey, you know what? We've got just as much left over and then some compared to what we did before, so we upped it a bit, and we upped it a bit more, and before the end of the year, we were up to 10%, and believe it or not, all our bills are being paid. There's money left over, and we had an unexpected gift from a relative for $30,000, and we've actually paid off our mortgage this year. He said this verse, that the windows of heaven, where it says there, are opened up and poured onto. He said, we've actually experienced that. He said, I'm never going back. He said, it's the most amazing life to live. God is so true to His word. He really hasn't changed. Reg was super excited. And the same thing for you. You may be there listening today and say, oh, this is such a big step. If you put God first, trust Him with all that you have. Trust Him with your resources. Everything you have is a gift from Him. Trust Him with that. He says, watch me, and I will open up the windows of heaven. When we bring our tithes and our offerings into His storehouse, it kind of removes the blockages for His blessings, and not just financial, in every area of our life, for His blessings to flow into our life. So, again, it removes the blockages from God blessing our lives. And this is what we read in Malachi chapter 3, what Reg was referring to. And try me now in this, or test me now in this, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven, pour out for you such a blessing that there will not be room enough to receive it. And I'll rebuke the devourer for your sake, so that he will not destroy the fruit of your ground, nor shall the vine fail to bear fruit for you in the field, says the Lord of hosts. So it is really a matter of trusting Him and just saying, God, I trust you. No wonder that proverb writer, Solomon, when he was coaching his son, he was encouraging him, trust God completely. It'll add life to you, give health to you, give you strength. And then he says, honor God at the first. Put Him first place. Don't put Him second place. Put Him first place in your life with your finances. Our finances leave a spiritual footprint, because Jesus said, wherever your treasure is, that's where your heart is. And if you want to find out where somebody's heart really is, you just look for the treasure. It's a footprint of where their spiritual life is heading. You might have been here today, and maybe you're here for the first time, or maybe you've come many times before, and God's been doing a work in your life, and you want to entrust your life to Him. You want to trust to the Lord with all your heart. And often, finances can be one of the stumbling blocks to committing our life to Christ. But He just wants you to know today that you can trust Him with this as well. He's so faithful. He says, try me. He's a loving God, a loving Father that wants a relationship with you. At this time, I'm going to invite the campus pastors to come up, and they're going to close in a prayer with you today and just encourage you. So I ask you to just join with them as they wrap up the service and close in prayer, where you too commit your life to Christ.